So basically, political philosophy. You see, political philosophers have this interesting attitude to life. We think that political philosophy is the most important thing that you can do in principle. And you see, because I told this to some of you in the seminar. See, you can live your life without thinking about Higgs boson and quantum fields. That's kind of possible. But you see, I mean, political philosophy and moral philosophy, which is related to political philosophy, asks this deep question, like when you wake up in the morning, what should I do with my life today? And you see, unless you ask yourself this question, I'm not sure if it qualifies that you are living your own life as a rational human being. It's like, these are the choices that people have to make one way or another. And if you don't make these choices, other people make these choices for you. Like, if you do not think for yourself, other people think for you. And maybe it's fine in terms of quantum fields and Higgs boson, but it's probably not fine in terms of ethics. So the way I like to phrase this is that if you don't do political philosophy does you. So you have to, so whether you will philosophize or won't philosophize, you must philosophize, as one of my teachers used to say. Anyway, so Hobbes. There's all sorts of things to talk about in Hobbes' biography. One of the things I recently, I knew this forever, but only recently I've begun thinking maybe this is important. See, Hobbes was actually, for his whole intellectual life, for all of his intellectual career, he was actually financially supported by a wealthy family to which he was attached as a tutor. As a private tutor. I wonder if this has any consequences for his political philosophy. Anyway, sorry, this is the digression. I shouldn't talk about this. So all sorts of things to talk about Hobbes' biography. I want to skip all of this. Usually the first thing that people begin with is that Hobbes was born on the day when the Spanish Armada was supposed to invade Britain. So Hobbes was born together with fear. And there's this whole, what's the right phrase? Whole idea, notion, topic of fear running through all of Hobbes' philosophy. Fear, to some extent, is going to be the most important political emotion for Hobbes. But again, I don't want to waste a lot of time. Maybe we'll come back on the to this on the second pass. But in general, when you write about this on the University of London exam, you only mention biography if this is relevant. And by and large, Hobbes' biography is not particularly relevant for his philosophy. What is relevant is the general historical background to his thought. So basically, again, I'm not sure if this board will be enough. Let me try. Okay, maybe even let's start here. So we begin with the background to Hobbes' philosophy. And basically, we need to talk about intellectual background and political background. So I suppose political background is simpler. So let's start with the political background. And by the way, okay, if I say something you don't understand, feel free to interrupt me, because this class is for you first and foremost, for to help you get a grip on the thinker. Anyway, so we begin with the political background. So the political background, I suppose, can be summarized by talking about the Reformation. So the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther. Hopefully you know about this from other courses, because we don't really have time to go into all of this. And what the Reformation causes, the immediate consequence of the Reformation is actually chaos. And more specifically, so chaos of the Reformation. And more specifically, we are talking about, even though this is political, but still, we're talking about intellectual chaos and political chaos. So, intellectual chaos, in the sense that for a very long time, by and large, if you were born in a good family and educated, you kind of had the idea that people know what the world is about. That, again, especially if you live like in the Christian Middle Ages, you know that there's a God, that He sent His Son to die for our sins. You know that there's a Bible, there's a certain way to read the Bible. There are authoritative people who can tell you what the Bible actually says. Like the Pope, for example, in Rome. So, by and large, in the Middle Ages, well-born, highly educated people all agreed with one another, by and large. Now, what happens after the Protestant Reformation is immediately Christianity splits into two, and then into 3, 4, 5, and a million other sects, and you have people, best intellectuals of the age, who vehemently disagree for example, on how to read the Bible. And if you're willing to believe Luther, you have to conclude that for 1,000 years, the brightest minds of Europe were reading the Bible wrong. And this causes a certain, very deep, a deep feeling of uncertainty. And this is immediately, maybe I should begin talking about this as well, is skepticism. This leads to skepticism, and Hobbes is a skeptical philosopher. He's one of the foremost skeptical philosophers, actually. Skepticism. Skepticism in the sense of understanding or realization that human mind is limited, and human knowledge is also limited, that we do not really have any privileged access to reality, that human beings can make mistakes, human beings are fallible, that we cannot trust our reason. We cannot trust our reason. This is going to be very important for Hobbes politically. We can't trust our reason. But politically, Reformation, of course, leads to chaos because we have wars of religion. Now, obviously, you've had history, so you understand this with a lot of nuance, hopefully, that basically, of course, wars of religion were not just about religion, but religion was a very important factor in the Well, first of all, which two wars am I thinking about? The 30 Years' War and the English Civil War. In both of these, religion played a crucial role. Again, it was not the only issue at stake, obviously, but it was a major contributing factor to the conflict. So, wars of religion. So, actually, maybe let me write this on the board with a question mark. Atheism. Is Hobbes an atheist? Well, actually, 3 question marks and with a red underline. Not exactly. Hobbes' theological views are complicated. When I say complicated, I mean that the best scholars disagree on how to interpret Hobbes. And you can, and especially first class honor students, should be able to do this in your essays. You should be able to give both sides of the argument. That Hobbes was a Christian, just a weird kind of Christian, or that Hobbes was an atheist. And when he talks, again, half of the Leviathan is actually, the most important book. Yeah, Hobbes' most important book is called the Leviathan, of course, hopefully you know, and half of this book, which we are not reading at all, because we're only reading a small portion of the Leviathan, half of the book is actually devoted to religious matters. You can ask this question, if Hobbes was an atheist, it's hard to say. The editor's introduction to the Blue Book Cambridge edition of the Leviathan actually calls Hobbes a Christian atheist. This is an interesting way to characterize Hobbes, because he takes Christianity seriously, but at the same time, there are reasons to doubt the sincerity of his religious convictions. So, when I say Christian atheist, so even if he's an atheist, why does he write half of the book about religion? Because religion is important politically. Because even if we cannot know what is the one true religion, or even if we cannot know what is the proper, right way to read the Bible, still, it is important that the government tell people what they should believe. Or at least, because Hobbes is adamant that, of course, you cannot force somebody to believe, like that is physically impossible. Maybe we can talk about this some other time. It is physically impossible to make a person believe a certain thing. Hobbes believes, right? But still, the government can order you to profess outwardly a certain faith, to go through the motions. Like the government can force you to go to church and to recite certain prayers, to recite certain oaths. And this is important politically. So Machiavelli and Hobbes are adamant about this. Both of them are skeptical about truths of religion, but both of them think this is very important for a stable government to basically, regulate religious affairs, to tell people what they should believe. And the immediate reason for this is this, the 30 Years' War. Because during so again, we have the 30 Years' War and the English Civil War, so let me write this here. So the 30 Years' War and the English Civil War. And during the 30 Years' War, do you know how many people died? Something like a quarter of the European population, this is an estimate. In some areas, up to a half of the population has died. So when Hobbes is going to talk about the state of nature, it's horrible, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, he's actually talking from experience. He lived at the time of the English Civil War and the 30 Years' War. He knows what life can be like in those places. So if you imagine a countryside ravaged by disease, by famine, and by marauding soldiers, it's not a nice place to be. You go to sleep at night, and you are not sure that you're going to wake up in the morning alive. This is the kind of thing he's talking about. And for Hobbes, the state of nature is a thought experiment, but it's not just a thought experiment. The state of nature has a certain deep reality to it. Hobbes has seen something like this, outside the window, basically. And in some sense, maybe this is the formative experience for Hobbes. And this is why fear is so important for him. Okay, but let's continue. So, yeah, and the outcome of the religious Reformation and the 30 Years' War is, well, kind of two things. So you have the emergence of the, so we have chaos, I don't know, number one. Then we have the emergence of the sovereign states and the emergence of individuality. So the states become sovereign states. The sovereign is going to be an important word. Hobbes uses this word all over the place. Hobbes constantly talks about sovereignty. Sovereign in Latin means supreme, highest. By definition, there is nobody above the sovereign. So sovereign power is highest power. The power, above which nothing stands. Hobbes, in his Christian atheist manner, is going to say that above the sovereign there's only God. But as a skeptic, Hobbes is going to say, well, human reason cannot tell us definitively about God. So actually, all the matters of religion should be decided by the sovereign. So yes, only God is above the sovereign. But who is God? What is God's law? Which books you should read? This is what the sovereign decides. So it's kind of like, is God above the king? Technically, yes, but practically, no. Because practically, the king decides what you should believe about God. Anyway, so the states become sovereign. And of course, you have this phrase that hopefully you remember from last year history. Cuius regio, eius religio. Who reigns decides the religion. I've heard from a student a very nice way of phrasing it. Does anybody remember the short, rhyming sentence about this? No? You don't remember? No. Different. Who reigns decides the religion. Okay, I'm gonna double check this. This is let's ask him. He had a nice limerick. It's a short and nifty phrase. Anyway, so what about individuality? Why is individuality important? It becomes important. Well, again, to oversimplify, and by the way, we talk about all of this, and even if you're not planning to write about Hobbes, this is going to be important for all the philosophers down the line, which is why, again, it's a good idea for us to go through all six thinkers together. So again, this is a background to Hobbes' thought, but to the thought of everybody, and especially the sovereign states. Sovereign states is going to be important for all the philosophers. In general, matters of religion, okay, I don't want to get there. Okay. Individuality. Now, this is also going to be important for all six thinkers. So basically, in the Middle Ages, you had this picture that there's God, there's the church, and then there's you, individual human beings. And your relationship to God is mediated through the church, which is why, among other things, so this is Catholicism. This is Catholicism, right? Which is why, incidentally, people can pray for one another. Which is why, again, the Pope tells you how to read the Bible. The Pope can listen to your confessions. The Pope can absolve your sins. All that kind of thing. Now, what happens with Luther? And again, this is a very interesting topic. I wish we had more classes to cover this. But actually, when Luther starts reading the Bible and comparing what the Bible actually says to what the church actually does, there seems to be a huge discrepancy. And you can open the Bible today and double check. See if you can find many of the modern institutions of Christianity in the Bible. And spoiler alert, you will not find many. And among other things, Luther notices that the translation, the Vulgate translation of St. Jerome, is not a particularly good translation. Also, Luther tries to find ancient manuscripts, and he finds that, first of all, we don't have the originals. We have copies of the Bible, and these copies are pretty bad. They were usually copied by hand by illiterate monks. This is a very laborious process. So illiterate monks sitting at night, behind the candle, would copy, not knowing how to read or write, copy letter by letter the Bible. So what's the right phrase? mistakes accumulate. So he cannot find one single original copy. So he has to look at multiple manuscripts. He's trying to read the Bible in the original. The New Testament is of course written in which language? Greek. Did you know the Bible was written in Greek, right? And the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Christian Old Testament, is written in Hebrew. So, for example, he cannot find some of the books of the Old Testament in Hebrew. And he says, you know what? I cannot find them in Hebrew, so they don't belong in the Bible. And he takes certain books and throws them out of the Bible. And this is, and so basically, different forms of Christianity use different Bibles, even today. And this is, again, in general, this is an interesting intellectual fact. This is a little bit of a digression, but maybe this will stimulate your mind. You see, the Bible, or the Quran, or the Torah, do not interpret themselves. Well, first of all, they're written in languages which are, in a technical sense, gone, because nobody, I mean, there are people who speak Hebrew today, but this is modern Hebrew. And how do you know that the words in modern Hebrew correspond to the words in the ancient Hebrew? Same with Arabic, for example. Because languages change, the meanings of words change. How do you know that you're reading the book in the exactly same fashion? I mean, modern Greek is different from ancient classical Greek, right? But these the books do not interpret themselves. People have to decide how to read those books. You know, a simple word in Hebrew, does it mean a virgin or does it mean a girl? Many people, you know, I imagine millions of people died over that question. You know, how you should translate this word. Anyway, that's point number one. Point number two, you see, it's also an interesting idea. You know, books can have four words, right? So certain books have a theory of what this book is. So for example, this book by Stephen Kahn, it has a foreword, and it tells you, I am Stephen Kahn, I have written this book for this purpose, I have chosen the thinkers in such a fashion, blah, blah, blah. So Stephen Kahn's Essential Text of Political Philosophy has a theory of Stephen Kahn's Essential Text of Political Philosophy. It tells you what it is. The Bible and the Quran do not have such chapters. There is no chapter in the Bible which tells you, let's say, I am Moses, I have written this book, these are the books that should be included, these are the books that should be excluded. It's not there. In fact, hundreds, sometimes thousands of years have passed before people, not God, not saints, but people, come together and decide which books to read and how to read them, and which books to include, which books to exclude. There's a whole bunch of, let's say, Gospels, Evangelion, right? There's a whole bunch of them in the ancient world. Only 4 are included in our Bible. There are others. For example, there's the Gospel of Thomas, which some people think predates the Gospel of John. Maybe even more authoritative than the Gospel of John, but it's not in the Bible. Okay, I'm digressing. But this is the problem. This is the problem. What is the solution? The solution is, Luther says, that because people make decisions, people can make mistakes. And if you do not double check other people's works, you will go to hell. You'll go to, yes, the Pope made a mistake, but you didn't double check what the Pope says. So you will go to hell. So it is your personal, individual responsibility to read the Bible. Individual responsibility. So look at this picture. We erase this picture. It's not you as a member of the church. No. As you know, a bunch of other people. No. Here's you, the little tiny worm, sinful worm, and there's God. You have a direct relationship with God. Søren Kierkegaard, who's possibly the most important Protestant philosopher of all times and places, calls this fear and trembling. Fear and trembling. You are alone in the face of God. And it is your responsibility to know which book to read and how to read it properly. So strictly speaking, technically speaking, Protestant religions like Lutheranism or Calvinism do not have priests. Well, I mean, they do have priests. They call some people priests, but these are like not like real priests. These are just like teachers. So, for example, like I am a priest of this book. I have been reading it for a long time, and I'm telling you how to read this book. But you see, if I misinterpret what this book says, and you write this on the University of London exam, you go to hell. Right? I do not have an authority from God to give you an authoritative reading of this book. Right? Paul Kelly does that. He's like an archangel who sits somewhere in heaven, and will judge you after you die in May. Right? Sorry. So again, priests and Lutheranists are people just like you, who simply have been reading this for a longer time, for longer periods of time, but you have to listen to their arguments. Reason is important. So here's the problem, right? We cannot trust reason, but we must rely on reason. Both of these are true. Both of these are true for Hobbes. So we have to rely on reason, but we also have to remember that our reason is limited. And in fact, it is our reason which shows us the limits of our reason. So through our reason, we establish the limits to our reason. So basically, like I know that I have made mistakes in the past, and rationally, I have to expect to continue making mistakes into the future. So my rationality tells me, yeah, rely on your rationality, but be careful. Because you are not omnipotent in this sense. So, for Hobbes, reason is important. Reason is important, even though he's a skeptic. But his way of thinking about reason is empiricism. Empiricism. And empiricism, the word empiricism, comes from the Greek word which means experience. So basically, Hobbes is going to say that basically the way we know about the world is through the senses, through experience, and then generalizing from sense experience, we derive certain rules of logic. So, like, to oversimplify, Hobbes is an empiricist, so for him, rules of logic or rules of math, how do you know that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4? You take two things, you count them together, you get 4. So, Hobbes at bottom is an empiricist. But if you are an empiricist and you say that knowledge has to be verified through experience, then you know that experience is prone to making mistakes. Like, you look at something in the distance, you come closer, and you realize it was an illusion. Or maybe you are asleep and you have a certain dream, and it feels real. Like the dream I have almost every, from time to time. The dream when the exam starts. I'm in your shoes, I'm sitting on an exam. The exam begins, and I'm reading through the task. Like 5 seconds have passed, and the examiner tells me, you have 5 minutes left. It's a dream I have. Too often, all too often. But you see, and I wake up in cold sweat, and I'm like, oh, it was just a dream. But while I was sleeping, it felt real. While I was sleeping, it felt real. So by my reason, when I wake up, I make this conclusion. I should not trust my reason too far. Because my reason tells me that my reason is limited. This is going to be politically important in a second. Hopefully I'll get there. Okay, so go back here. So background. Reformation, states become, this is both of these are a consequence of Reformation. So states become sovereign, and individuals have to use their own reason. Understanding that the reason is limited at the same time. First of all, in religious matters, but in general. And there's more to be said about this. I mean, just for fun, let me just mention this. The printing press becomes important, and because of the printing press, people can own their own books, and so silent reading becomes a thing. In the Middle Ages, books were very expensive, so basically the only time you would open a book is to read out loud to everybody. So reading was like performing a musical score. And the notion of reading a text was as absurd to a notion of reading a musical score. You wouldn't read a musical score, you should listen to music. The same way in the Middle Ages, people thought you shouldn't read books, you should listen to books being read out loud. But here, you get the emergence through the printing press of silent reading, and this also contributes to the development of individuality. Because silent reading is an individual phenomenon, whereas public communal reading is this communal affair, and one person reads, everybody else listens, something like that. Anyway, let me push forward. So, again, skepticism, atheism with a question mark, empiricism, very importantly, but also, we have materialism. Because Hobbes is a member of this new generation. People who are exposed to new science, to the new science, right? And Hobbes actually had a personal correspondence with people like Galileo and with people like Descartes. So he knows about this new science. And what this new science tells us is that the world is made of matter in motion. Chaotic matter in motion. So we have materialism and also closely related to this mechanicism. And the upshot of both of this is that the world is chaotic matter in motion. The chaos of matter in motion. As Kant puts it, the best formulation of this is that if this worldview is true, then the world is the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. The abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. So I think it's der Schlund, der zwecklosen Chaos der Materie. Something like that. The abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. And also, let me write this here. This is anti-teleology. Teleology. Okay, teleology. Fancy word. Anybody remembers this from last year? Teleology is associated with the name of Aristotle. The Greek word telos means, no, somebody? No, this is theos, means God. Okay, don't confuse the two. So telos means aim or purpose or goal. Aim or purpose or goal. Telos. So the Aristotelian or the Christian teleological worldview is that there's a natural hierarchy in the world. The stars and God is up there. We are down here. The stars affect us. We do not affect the stars. This is teleological worldview. There's natural hierarchy. There's natural order. Everything that happens for a reason. If you want, for God's reason. Everything that happens for a purpose. If you have a splinter in your toe or a pimple on your forehead, this is because God willed it directly. This is the medieval worldview. This is the medieval worldview which borrows from Aristotle. Why? So Hobbes is completely against that. Hobbes says, no, nothing has meaning, nothing has purpose. There is no hierarchy. Let me illustrate this. So you have this wonderful formula, which you probably know. So F is equal to M1 multiplied by M2 divided by R squared multiplied by constant G. Remember this formula? So, formula for the force of gravity from Newton. By the way, this formula is wrong. Of course, you need to add an Einsteinian relativistic, so plus Einstein relativistic correction. But let's forget about Einstein for 1 second. So the purpose of what is the point of this formula? This M1 and M2. There are two bodies. Maybe this cup and this marker, or maybe me and the planet Earth, or maybe your body and the black hole at the center of the Milky Way, Sagittarius A star. See, M1 multiplied by M2. The Sagittarius A star moves and it affects my body, or the sun moves and it affects my body. I wave my arm and I affect Sagittarius A star. No joke. I mean, of course, the influence is tiny, but you see, this hierarchy is broken. It's not that the skies are up there and we're down here. No, the skies affect us, we affect the skies. Again, me doing this stupid motion, I affect the trajectory of the moon. You can do this for fun. Your parents come into your room and say, what are you doing? You say, I am affecting the trajectory of the moon. But mathematically, physically, it's true. This is completely anti-Aristotelian. Aristotle thought that it's impossible. Aristotle thought that the heavens, the skies, the planets are perfect and they direct us, but we cannot influence them. They are perfect and changeless. And this is not true anymore. This natural hierarchy is broken. So nothing is sacred. The world has no meaning. Your life has no purpose. This is what Hobbes says as a materialist. Okay. The universe has no purpose, no hierarchy, your life has no meaning, live with it, deal with it. This is basically Hobbesian approach. Okay. So let me double check what I have to talk about next. So I suppose the next thing that we need to talk about is what are the political consequences of all this. Okay, so let's start here. So the political consequences will have to do with human beings. So keeping these assumptions in mind, what can we say about humans? And Hobbes is going to talk about six things. Well, actually, or 5 things starting from point 0. So point 0, I already talked about this, that the world is matter in motion. The abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. In fact, if you want, chaotic matter in motion. And what this means, first and foremost, is that there is no natural morality. Nothing is good or evil by itself. No natural morality. Hobbes is a very radical thinker. You see, you don't need to wait until Nietzsche or Max Stirner. All of the radical conclusions are already there in Hobbes. Hobbes says, this is an important phrase, that we will read, and you will need to maybe learn for the exam. Whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire is that which he, for his part, calls good. And the object of his hate and aversion is what he calls evil. There being nothing simply and absolutely so. Okay, let me repeat that. Whatsoever is the object of your appetite or desire, that's what you call good. Of your hate and aversion, that's what you call evil. Nothing is simply and absolutely good or evil. Hobbes is radical in this respect. So maybe I can add to the list of these topics, I can add relativism moral relativism, right? And maybe even, with a question mark, solipsism. Okay, let's talk about the word solipsism for 5 seconds. Actually, one of your home assignments will talk about this. Is Hobbes a solipsist? So solipsism comes from the Latin phrase solo ipso, which means only me. Only me. Only I exist. So does Hobbes believe that only he exists? No. But he wants to say that in an important respect, like you are locked inside of your head. You interact with the world through your perceptions, empirical perceptions, and also through your judgments. Nothing is true in and of itself, at least with respect to us, and nothing is good or evil in and of itself. Or at least we do not have access to absolute truth and to absolute moral truth. That's why, I mean, like solipsism is some kind of a version of extreme egoism. Is what Hobbes is going to say. And of course, sometimes you may do quote-unquote altruistic things, but Hobbes says when you do something quote-unquote altruistic, you do it because you like it. So for example, maybe you are giving pity to the poor, but you are doing this, says Hobbes, not because you care about the poor, but because you want to relieve yourself of the pain of compassion. Relieve yourself of the pain of compassion. So for Hobbes, again, people, if they do altruistic things, it's only because they want to do it for themselves. Again, parents take care of the children because they have this natural desire for their children. Desire in a broad sense, right? Desire in the sense, like parents do good things for their children because parents want to be happy themselves, and seeing their children happy makes them happy in a selfish fashion. In some sense like that. Okay, we'll talk about this more down the line. Okay, maybe I should speed up a little bit. So, okay, let me write out all of the points, and then we'll see if we need to talk about them in detail. So, okay, so this is point number 0. Point number 1, related to this, is he says human beings are appetitive. This is, by the way, this is from your study guide. Human beings are appetitive, driven by appetites. And so, again, this is important. There is no universal standard of right and wrong, and also reason cannot tell you what to do. Reason can only serve as a calculator. Reason tells you what is the best way to satisfy your desires, but by itself, no desire is irrational. So again, one man plants flowers, another man eats children, so on. Different kinds of desires, and reason can tell you what is the most efficient way to plant flowers, or what is the most efficient way to eat children, but reason cannot tell you whether it's right or wrong to do these things. Okay. Secondly, Hobbes talks about how human beings naturally live in a condition of scarcity. Scarcity. He says, first of all, our appetites are potentially unlimited and ever-changing. As Hobbes puts it, human beings have a perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceases only in death. So again, our appetites are constantly changing and potentially insatiable. So changing and insatiable. And some people can say, well, you see, Hobbes, I'm sitting, in my evening, in my house, and I feel satisfied. I've satisfied all my desires. And Hobbes says, yeah, maybe. For the time being, you've satisfied your desires. But wait until the morning. In the morning, maybe you'll have new desires. Okay, maybe you have achieved Buddhist nirvana in the evening, but in the morning you wake up and you want bronze statues to be erected in your honor. Who knows? This is point number 1. And also point number 2, related to this, he says some people will want more than their fair share, will want more than they need. Let's say want to accumulate more money than they need to survive and enjoy life. They want to use this money because they want other people to glorify them or something like that. And because some people want to get more than they need, potentially, maybe you will not have enough to survive. Mm-hmm. So first of all, our desires are changing and insatiable, but also we are radically insecure. Because if some people will want to get too much, maybe you will not have enough to eat, naturally. Okay. Point number 3 is very important. He talks about the desire for glory. And in Hobbes, in some sense, all of the Leviathan is about this. Like one of the key, let me write this here. Like one of the ways to summarize all of the Leviathan is this interplay between fear and the desire for glory. this is the reason for the name of the book. Who is this Leviathan? Well, Leviathan is a biblical sea monster. And, well, okay, I'm not sure if this picture is going to clarify anything. Anyway, so Leviathan is a biblical sea monster who appears in the, do you remember? In the book of, no? Nobody wants to send this. Okay.
We can assign dark matters.
Yeah. In the book of Job, Leviathan appears in the book of Job. Now, Leviathan appears in a very interesting context. This kind of maybe is a digression, but I don't know. This is the name. This is the title of a book. So let's talk about this in 5 seconds. So just for fun, God wants to test Job's faith. So Job is this guy who, in Russian, Eov. He's supposed to be a righteous man, and he loves Yahweh and serves Yahweh, right? The God of the Hebrew Bible, of the Old Testament. And Satan, who is actually not a bad person in the book of Job. Satan is just God's lieutenant, and the word Satan in Hebrew actually means adversary. So, like a prosecutor, procureur, but not really a bad person. And Satan says, you know what, Yahweh, this guy Job, he's not actually good. He likes you and he praises you because he's lucky. He has everything he wants in life. And God looks at it and says, well, Satan, maybe you're right. Okay, Satan, do bad things to him, and let's see if he still loves me after that. And so Satan kills Job's children, afflicts him with a horrible disease, etc., etc. And in the book, Job stays true to Yahweh through all these trials, and in the end, he's rewarded. That's the point of the story. But at some point, Job, even though he's not cursing Yahweh, he's really displeased, and he tears his clothes and he shouts at the heaven, like, God, why are you doing this to me? And here comes Yahweh actually, and says, Job, do you know who I am? I'm Yahweh. And as a bragging point, he says, do you know Leviathan, this horrible sea monster? Well, you know what? Yahweh, I have chained Leviathan. Basically, like he says, Leviathan is my bitch. And Leviathan, so what's the point of this? So Leviathan is such a great sea monster, such a horrible monstrosity, that Yahweh, the God, right, brags to Job, like what's the right phrase? Like the chief achievement in life, like the highest achievement. Like, do you know who I am? I have chained Leviathan. That's the point. Okay, so this is where the sea monster comes from. Now, why is Hobbes using this image of the Leviathan? So Leviathan is supposed to be, well, first of all, it actually again a quotation from the book of Job that nothing is above Leviathan on earth. Obviously, there's something in heaven above Leviathan, and that's Yahweh, because he has chained Leviathan. But sort of short of Yahweh, nobody can deal with Leviathan. He's like the most horrible monstrosity imaginable on this planet. And another phrase, which is maybe a more important phrase, in the book of Job, Leviathan is called the king of the children of pride. The king of the children of pride. So the purpose of this great sea monster, Leviathan, which is why, again, Hobbes uses this phrase, is because through fear, the Leviathan, the state, the king, if you want, will subdue the glory-seeking animal, and the glory-seeking animals who are human beings, and thereby achieve peace. So if you want Leviathan in 5 seconds, human beings by nature have fear and glory. Fear leads to peace, glory leads to war. War is bad, therefore the task of the government is by fear to subdue glory and thereby avoid war and maintain peace. This is Leviathan in 5 seconds, okay? All of Hobbes is Leviathan. But we'll get there. Okay, let's go back to the board. So people are glory-seeking animals, and the last 2 points, and again, and glory-seeking, our glory-seeking characteristic capacity leads to war. Glory leads to war. Again, I said this, right? So even if the earth produces enough goods to feed everyone, some people are glory-seeking, not necessarily all. Maybe you are not like that. But some people want to be adored, want to be worshipped, want golden statues erected in their honor, want people to tremble in fear and to, in this Machiavellian fashion, to love and to fear them, to deify them. Some people Maybe you know some people like that, right? Some people are like that. And those people will try to seek more and more and more of material things. And that's why there will be scarcity. It doesn't matter how many stuff, how many gold and food and silver there is on earth. These people who are glory-seeking people, they will try to get as much as possible. And in fact, they will compete with one another who has more. And this is a game that cannot be won. Because again, if you are competing for glory, there's only one winner. So this is an insatiable. This is the desire for glory is by definition an insatiable desire. The fear of death is a desire that can be satisfied, but the desire for glory can never be satisfied, and that's why it leads to war. Okay, and the last 2 points. The last 2 points is mistrust. Again, yeah, there's a term of English language which you haven't heard before, but it's a good idea to use it on the exam. Because Hobbes uses this phrase, and also the study guide uses this phrase. And the English phrase is diffidence. 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 And diffidence means mistrust. Mistrust. That basically, again, for reasons of skepticism and for reasons of empiricism, you see, I don't know. What are your intentions? Again, you imagine in this hypothetical state of nature, hypothetical scenario, like you go some remote place, and you see a person, let's say, in a forest, at the other edge of the forest, and you ask yourself, can I trust them? Can I trust them? And Hobbes says, maybe that person is this glory-seeking animal who wants to, kill you and wear your, like take your skull as a trophy, something like that, right? And you cannot know, because people can lie. People can lie. And empirically speaking, I, looking at your head, at your face, cannot read your mind. And that's why what I should do is shoot first, ask questions later. So even if I myself, even if I am not glory-seeking, because only some people will be glory-seeking, even if I am not glory-seeking, still, because I'm afraid that you may be a glory-seeking animal, I have to shoot first, ask questions later. So this again, and all of this ultimately, all of this naturally. So what are these things? This is human nature. This is, according to Hobbes, the natural characteristics of human beings. So in the absence of some external mechanisms, of external constraints put in by society, human beings naturally will exhibit all these qualities. And the last point that Hobbes talks about is equality, fundamental equality. So when Hobbes says that human beings are equal, of course, you can say, but Hobbes, look outside the window. Some people are strong, some people are weak, some people are tall, some people are short. Some people walk the streets, some people take philosophy classes, all sorts of inequality. Hobbes says, yeah, maybe. But it doesn't matter, because even the weakest person can kill the strongest in the state of nature. So outside of society, outside of social protection, outside of the police and surveillance camps and SWAT teams with MP5s, right? Outside of all of this, in the state of mere nature, in the state of pure nature, even the strongest person has to sleep. And while they're asleep, even the weakest person can strangle them or poison them or do something to them in that fashion. So again, it's a very interesting way. Hobbes, as this anti-teleological materialist, what is his reason for saying that human beings are equal? Because even the weakest person can kill the strongest person. Okay. And basically, the result of all of this is Hobbes says that by nature, human beings end up in a condition of the war, so all of this leads to the war of all against all. War of all against all. As Hobbes says, using his Shakespearean spelling of English, this is how he writes, war. And life, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So, and he adds, no commodious buildings, no conveniences of life, no arts, no sciences, no technology, that kind of thing. So a really miserable condition in which you go to sleep at night and you're not sure you're going to wake up in the morning. So when we talk about this, immediately, this is what Hobbes calls the state of nature. The state of nature. And immediately we have to ask ourselves this question. What is the state of nature? Well, first of all, how should I put this? One way to look at this is this. That, again, like you take calcium, and you isolate it in the test tube to see the natural properties of calcium. This is something like Hobbes does. He says that if human beings are isolated from their social relations, this is what they're like. And so, in a certain respect, the state of nature is a basic condition of society at all times. So you have the state of nature, and on top of the state of nature, you have society. So if for some reason society collapses, we go back to the state of nature. So for example, in the times of civil war, or in general, in times when there is no common superior, you will see something approaching the state of nature. Not necessarily like completely, because maybe the breakdown of power is not complete. Because again, think of a Russian Revolution. During the Russian Revolution, yeah, there was chaos, but still there were factions. There was a white army, and there was some subordination. There was a red army, and some subordination. So it wasn't pure state of nature. But you can see that there's like this asymptotic approach, if you want, to this condition. So the state of nature can be seen in times of civil war. Also, very importantly, in the international relations, because there are no superiors above the sovereign states, in the international relations, you always live in the condition of war. He says, so, and this is important. For reasons we'll talk about in a second, the sovereign, the king or the parliament, let's say the king, does not sign the social contract. The sovereign is actually not a member of society. The sovereign always exists in the state of nature. And because of that, the sovereign has no obligations. The sovereign lives in this condition where there is no natural morality, and anything can be done by the sovereign. We'll talk about this in a second. And I should talk about this because this is important. What else do they have written here? I cannot make this out. So yeah, but to some extent, maybe you can think of this as a thought experiment. Thought experiment in what sense? In the sense that, like, even in the worst times, even during the 30 Years' War, you never see complete collapse of public authority, right? So some pockets of culture remain, right? So basically, like again, this is some kind of extreme asymptotic state that Hobbes is talking about. Now, also very importantly, Hobbes. So if you ask this question, is the state of nature real for Hobbes? The answer is yes, with qualifications. The state of nature is real, and it can be seen in times of breakdown of power, in times of civil war, or between different states. They always exist in the state of nature. But at the same time, Hobbes insists, and this is kind of important, that the state of nature is not the historical condition of mankind. What he means by this is kind of complicated. Not sure how to talk about this exactly. This is actually going to be a whole separate issue. For people who are going to write about Hobbes on the University of London exam, there's a particular question that the University of London likes to ask, and you have to write a 1-hour essay in response to this question. If the state of nature is as Hobbes described it, is it possible to leave it? Because it seems that if these conditions apply to all people in all times and all places, it's impossible for people to get out of this. Because again, if you shoot first, ask questions later, people cannot get together to start negotiating the social contract. So, and Hobbes explicitly says that if you look at ancient past, this is not our ancient past. So the state of nature is a description of the basis of our society right now, today. This is not some kind of what's our phrase? Reconstruction of time immemorial. Anyway, we'll talk about this more in due course. So let me leave it at that. So basically, yeah. So basically, yeah. The next thing I should talk about is how we get to the social contract. So this is not the social contract itself, but sort of we're on the way to it. So Hobbes begins. I understand there's a lot of stuff, but I want to get at least through the main points. Hobbes begins by saying that in the state of nature, our legal regime is what he calls the right of nature. right of nature. It's an interesting and unusual thing. Hobbes places rights before duties, he places rights before laws. This is important for Hobbes. I'm going to explain in a second why. And more specifically, the right of nature, well, again, if the world is matter in motion, and God is remote and unknowable to us, so again, let me go back a step. So, is Hobbes an atheist? That's a complicated question, but Hobbes will always insist that God is incomprehensible. God is incomprehensible. And because God is incomprehensible, you cannot talk about God in your political philosophy. So he will not appeal to God in his political philosophy. And notice also, if God has a law, let's say in the Bible, God, empirically speaking, certainly does not enforce this law. Again, at the time of the 30 Years' War, a quarter, in certain places up to a half of the European population dies. Where's God? Did he fall asleep? God is certainly not enforcing his law on this earth. And what happens to us after we die? This is, empirically speaking, an unknown matter. So anyway, so in the state of nature, you have the right of nature. And this right of nature, where does it derive from? It derives from reason, but reason, remember, does not give you motives for action. So it has to be derived from kind of desire. So which desire? Desire to preserve yourself. So the right of nature is the right of self-preservation. Self-preservation. Does God give us this right? Well, not exactly. Hobbes says it is, we are just matter in motion. We are matter in motion. We are similar to mechanical clocks. There is no interesting difference between humans and robots for Hobbes. And so, like, the watch, let's say, has a spring and it unwinds and the clock moves. Likewise, human beings have something like a spring, which Hobbes calls endeavor, inside of ourselves, and as the spring unwinds, we do things. But humans are just a certain kind of matter in motion, completely analogous to mechanical clocks or robots. So basically, Hobbes says that you have all sorts of desires, million desires. These desires change all the time. But in order to satisfy any desire, you have to be alive. So the desire to preserve yourself is always fundamental. It's more fundamental with respect to all of your other desires. So naturally speaking, your reason, while you're alive, has to always tell you that you need to preserve yourself. And as you're trying to preserve yourself, your reason has to decide what is the best way to do so. So in self-preservation, you have this is very important, a right to all things. A right to all things. In self-preservation, yes, but you decide what you need for self-preservation. So you have a right to absolutely anything. So in the state of nature, and by the way, when you say that everybody has a right to anything, it means that nobody has a right to nothing, basically. If everybody has a right to everything, nobody has any right to any particular thing. So basically there's no property in the state of nature, and also if I decide that for my self-preservation I need to kill you, yeah, I'm entitled to do that. But you are also entitled to kill me. So basically, this is a regime of complete lawlessness, if you want. He calls this a right of nature, but actually it means that there are no rights. Okay, let me pause for 1 second. There was a question. Huh?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify presence of reason. Rights of nature is also not trust our reason, then our reason to survive, and then I have the liberty and right to kill everyone who might.
Yeah, something like that. Well, again, when Hobbes says you cannot trust your reason, it's not like you cannot trust your reason, but you should be careful when you trust your reason. In the state of nature, you have no choice. You have to trust your own reason. But in society, you have to trust the sovereign. Because you don't know what's best for you. We'll talk about this in a second. Question?
Sorry, do you think Hobbes' view of the state of nature depicts human relations and human nature at its best, at its worst, or at its normal state?
Yeah. Well, again, Hobbes says this is what human beings do by nature. So this is the natural tendency. So in some sense, this is normal for all human beings. This is the normal condition for all human beings. And Hobbes would say that all human beings by nature are bad. Yes. That's why, incidentally, Hobbes says, when you go back tonight to your house, you will lock your door. Even though we live in a society and there's police and surveillance cam, still, most of you will not be comfortable sleeping in your house with the door unlocked or maybe wide open. And Hobbes says, Hobbes says, I think that human beings are bad. And if you don't think that human beings are bad, why do you lock your doors? Don't you, says Hobbes, accuse mankind by your actions more than I do by my words. Okay, apologies. I'd love to take questions, but I wanna get out the most important stuff first. So basically, then from the right of nature, we get the laws of nature. And the laws of nature are basically, Hobbes says, they are theorems of reason which conduce to our self-preservation. Theorems of reason which conduce to our self-preservation. So basically, again, theorems. We live in this world of chaotic matter and motion. Nothing is good or bad by itself. Nothing is legal or illegal by itself. These are just the theorems that conduce, that help us to preserve ourselves. Now, those of you who are going to take Hobbes and who want to get first class, well, actually, no, probably everybody. Everybody who's going to take Hobbes, you will need to write a couple sentences here. Because Hobbes also says, but if we consider the same theorems as commands of God, who by right rules all things, then these theorems are properly called laws. And there's a whole school of interpretation of Hobbes, Kantian interpretation of Hobbes, which actually says no, Hobbes believes in God, and for Hobbes, laws of nature are really properly laws. So you will need to write at least a sentence about that. But we'll get there later. So let me put an asterisk. But for now, we will forget about this and we will imagine that these are just theorems. Theorems in the sense of recipes. If you want to preserve yourself, do this and that. The study guide. So there are actually 19 laws. And the study guide talks about 3 most important ones. All 19 laws can be summarized as the silver rule. And the silver rule says, well, the silver rule is the reverse of the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would them do unto you, right? Поступай с другими так, как ты хочешь, чтобы они поступали с тобой. Silver rule is the reverse. Do not do unto others as you would not them do unto you. Не поступай с другими так, как ты не хочешь, чтобы они поступали с тобой. So these all 19 rules can be summarized in that fashion. So the study guide says the three most important laws are seek peace, lay down the right to all things, and keep agreements. But you do these 3 things only when in security, only when reciprocity is assured. So we have the 3 most important laws. We'll talk about them later. But it's important that you keep these laws, you keep them only when in security. Or more specifically, only when there is guarantee of reciprocity. So basically, if there is no, reciprocity, reciprocity, right? Reciprocity, mutuality, взаимность. So, if I see you at the other edge of the forest, and I have no guarantee that you're not trying to kill me, I should first ask questions later. I do not follow the laws of nature. But if I have some guarantee of peace, then I have to fulfill the laws of nature. But there has to be a guarantee. There has to be a guarantor, and this guarantor is going to be the sovereign, who through fear will subdue the children of pride. We'll talk about this in a second. As Hobbes says, covenants without swords are but words. Covenants without swords are but words. Basically, the social contract, and we are moving towards the social contract. The social contract always requires an enforcer with swords to enforce the social contract and to punish people who violate the social contract. And unless there's this agent who will punish the offenders, then the social contract is void, is null, is annulled, it's meaningless. And Hobbes actually says, in the state of nature, to keep promises is idiotic. In the state of nature, to keep promises is against the reasons of your self-preservation. He says, in war, force and fraud are 2 cardinal virtues. People who keep agreements in the state of nature are idiots, and they are just killing themselves. You should only keep agreements if you have a reasonable expectation that violators of agreements will be punished. Okay. Yeah. So basically, in order to have this reciprocity, we need this sword that will, as Hobbes says, keep men in awe. Awe. Where awe is a combination of fear and respect, and love, I guess. So awe, where you get the word awesome. But notice, in the state of nature, we're all equal. Even the weakest can kill the strongest. So in the state of nature by itself, there is no power to keep all men in awe. That's why we need the social contract, and that's the point of the social contract. Okay, let me close this and let's get to the social contract. So, the social contract for Hobbes works in the following fashion. I understand we're rushing through a lot of things, but don't worry, we'll slow down and go over all this again. He says, basically, a bunch of people get together. Well, I'm not sure if this is the best way of putting it, but let me try. So, first of all, only the people sign the social contract. The social contract is between the people. So only the people sign the social contract. What the social contract is about is the following thing. People get together and they say, I give up my right of governing myself to this third party who is the sovereign, on the condition that you give up your right as well. The sovereign does not sign the social contract. This is very important. So only the people sign, and by the social contract they designate the sovereign. They give up the rights to the sovereign. And again, the covenant is between each other. And I promise to obey the sovereign as long as you promise to obey the sovereign. But the sovereign does not sign the contract. Because the sovereign does not sign the contract, the sovereign is still in the state of nature. And the sovereign still has the right to all things. And this is why international relations are exemplification of the state of nature. Real world example of the state of nature. Again, it's important. And because the sovereign does not sign the social contract, he cannot break the social contract. Whatever the sovereign does is lawful, legal. The sovereign can do whatever. Maybe at some point, remind me, let's talk about this picture. Because Hobbes actually gives an illustration. You have the cannon, the castle, the church pope's tiara, and also you have the representation of the university. And the sovereign is above all that. The sovereign has complete power over the military and political affairs, and also over the religious and intellectual life. The sovereign has supreme authority on any issue. Immediately, maybe we should note that the sovereignty is not a person. The sovereignty is an office. The strength of the sovereign is derived from the consent of the people. In the state of nature, we're all equal, and even the weakest can kill the strongest. So only by uniting our wills in a single person, only in that way, we can make sure that this person is going to be strong enough to punish the offenders. So sovereignty is an office. And this office, in principle, can be occupied by a monarch, by a council of aristocrats, or by a council of all people, which is what Hobbes calls democracy. So Hobbes says that there are three possible forms of government: monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. So basically, what is the difference? Good question. We'll talk about this later. What is the difference between democracy and the state of nature? In the democracy, you vote, and everybody obeys the vote of the majority, regardless of how they voted. Now, Hobbes thinks that of these three, the most practical one is monarchy. He thinks that monarchy is better, but in general, he doesn't care very much. Like, if you can make democracy work, fine. But he thinks that, well, basically why? Because Hobbes is afraid of the civil war, and it's harder for the monarch to disagree with himself. Actually, again, the English Civil War, to some extent, in some fashion, this is not a perfect description, but to some extent has begun as an interparliamentary conflict. Part of the parliament disagreed with another part of the parliament. They couldn't decide whose motion would carry the day, and so they went to war. So because of this, Hobbes thinks that monarchy is the most practical because it minimizes the chance of the civil war. And by the way, the constitution of Russian Federation is completely Hobbesian. Because we have a sovereign, and the sovereign is the people in their collective capacity. And you have no rights against the people in the collective capacity, who is the sovereign of the Russian Federation. They can do whatever. People in their collective capacity can make whatever law. There are no checks and balances with respect to the decision of the people as a whole, like during a referendum, let's say. Question?
Why doesn't Hobbes find the monarch itself as a problematic figure? Because initially, like, it seems civil war has started because the monarch was this glorious figure who was.
Okay, we should talk about this maybe in the seminar because this is not the most important issue, but I can give a simple answer. The simple answer is because the civil war began because the parliament thought that they had rights against the monarch, and this was false. So it's not that the monarch was not the problem; the parliament was the problem. They mistakenly thought that they had rights. And Hobbes says, "Look what happened. They suffered under the monarchy, but this all pales in comparison to the civil war. Like maybe the monarch was bad, but the civil war was much worse. So it actually, if they knew what the reason of the self-preservation was, they would obey the monarch because it's better. And in fact." Do I have space? I wonder. Yeah. So another way to put Hobbes in 1 second. So again, Hobbes says that if you look very carefully at the state of nature and what this is like, poor, solitary, nasty, brutish, and short, what you will conclude. This is not Hobbes. This is my attempt to summarize Hobbes. What you will conclude is this. Even the worst tyranny is still better than anarchy. Even the worst tyranny is still better than anarchy. Now, if you want to be careful, what you should do is you should do this. Tyranny, the worst tyranny, can sometimes be as bad as anarchy, but never worse. And, okay, this is a complicated discussion, but like as a preliminary conversation starter, I would ask you to think, imagine the 30 Years' War. Half of the European population dies in certain places. Quarter to half of the European population, right? In the space of 30 years. This is not the death rate in Stalin's Russia, and this is not the death rate in Hitler's Germany. So actually, if you asked people during the 30 Years' War, would they prefer to be in a concentration camp, many of them would probably answer yes. Well, again, imagine medieval ways of torturing people. Okay, I'm sure gulags were bad, but compare this to the Inquisition. I'm not sure. Okay, so but again, this is another way to summarize all of Hobbes' philosophy. And by the way, so he says this because, again, as a skeptic and as a materialist. He says it is according to the laws of nature. It is in the reason of your self-preservation to obey even the worst government, because disobeying the government puts you always in the worst position. Okay, so, but let me, wow, time flies. This is bad. Okay, I suppose, I know, we ran out of time technically, but let me get two things out, which are important. So, one thing is that, you see, since the sovereign does not sign the contract, he cannot break the contract. But there are situations where the contract becomes null or void. Contract annullирован. Where? How? This is where. Reciprocity. The contract requires that people will be punished for the violations of the contract. Covenants without swords are but words. So if the sovereign loses the power to protect you, so mutual relationship between protection and obedience. If the sovereign loses the power to protect you, then the contract becomes void. And the sovereign, strictly speaking, stops being the sovereign. So, let me write this. Mutual relation between protection and obedience. Hobbes actually summarizes all of the Leviathan in this phrase. There's a mutual relation between protection and obedience. As long as you are protected, you should obey. But if you are not protected, then the contract is automatically void. So if the sovereign loses a war, or if the sovereign is trying to kill you, the contract is void, and you are not obliged to obey. This is point number one. Point number two is, look, but if the sovereign is this horrible beast who can do absolutely whatever, and you have no rights against the sovereign whatsoever, why would you obey the sovereign? I mean, is it really going to be better than the state of nature? Okay, again, like technically speaking, you have like this sign, but wouldn't it mean that most of the time all sovereignties are simply as bad as the state of nature? And Hobbes says, strictly speaking, nothing legally prevents the sovereign from being horribly tyrannical and just abusing you as much as possible. But, so even though the sovereign has the right to do it, it doesn't mean that the sovereign will. In fact, says Hobbes, and this is a very important portion of his doctrine, he says, you have a reasonable expectation that the sovereign will protect you. Again, reasonable expectation is not a right. Humans have no right against the sovereign whatsoever. So this is important. There is no right of resistance or rebellion for Hobbes. The sovereign can do whatever and the subjects always have to obey. Unless the contract becomes void, right? But still, even though I have no rights, I have a reasonable expectation that the sovereign will take care of me for a very simple reason. Because the sovereign is also afraid. The sovereign is afraid of other sovereigns. Sovereigns are in conflict with one another. And the strength and the vigor of the subjects is the basis of the power of the sovereign. If my subjects are poor and destitute and diseased, I will not be able to defend myself from other sovereigns. So actually, protecting me and taking care of me is in the interest of the sovereign. And Hobbes actually devotes huge portions of Leviathan. Again, those of you, first class honor, look this up. Laws are like hedges. Laws are like hedges for Hobbes. Most of the time, the sovereign will try to take care of you and will try to give you rights and freedom and all that thing. Again, it's a free gift and the sovereign can always take it back. But the sovereign in general will try to give you as much freedom and happiness as possible because your strength is the source of his power. Which is why I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think why Hobbes is such a powerful political philosopher. Certainly one of my favorite philosophers in this course. We start on a high note. Because at the same time, Hobbes will tell you why the slaves of ancient Egypt obeyed. Like, look at all of human political history, and Hobbes can explain it. Again, the slaves in Egypt obeyed because they were afraid of death. Because the alternative to disobeying the pharaoh was even worse. But at the same time, Hobbes can also, in principle, explain why we have all this democracy and human rights today. Because to the extent that giving rights to people actually increases the power of the state, that's good. And the states will do this. So he both gives us a general conditions of possibility of social life and also plots the potential or the possibility of progress in terms of human happiness and freedom.
Can we apply the concept of glory here? Like if the subjects are doing well, like then he can be like, proud of his achievements. Or is it like really different?
Short answer, yes. I mean, the sovereign, I think, so people invade for gain, for glory, and out of difference, I think, yeah. So people fight for three reasons for Hobbes. One is because they are afraid that they will not have enough to eat tomorrow. So it's out of necessity. The second is because by fighting, I get something I want. And the third reason is glory. Yes, glory. So the sovereign will take care of the subjects for all three reasons. Because again, this is what he's going to use the power for. Again, the richer and the more prosperous are my subjects, the higher I can tax them, the better they fight, the higher is my glory. Yeah. So the short answer is yes, completely. It's not the only reason, but it's one of three reasons. Other questions? That was a good question.
Sorry, it may seem trivial, but when you say that the people designate a sovereign in Leviathan, do they do it as a grassroots process or is it structural? Is it designated from cooperation or subordination?
Yeah. This is a very good question because you see, for Hobbes, it's a complicated technical issue. See, in the state of nature, because we're all equal, it seems it's impossible to find the sovereign, to decide who the sovereign is going to be. So most of the time, under normal circumstances, the Hobbes imagines that this process is taking place when the sovereignty is already established. So you imagine there's a country, and a bunch of nomads come to the border of this country and say, we will submit, please protect us. Or, let's say, a conqueror conquers a certain territory, and the subject population pledge allegiance to the new conqueror. So, I imagine that in historical circumstances, most of the time this is a top-down process. A powerful sovereign comes, and people submit to this powerful sovereign who's already established. I mean, for Hobbes, technically speaking, and this is again, future Hobbesians. Who's playing to write about Hobbes? A bunch of people, maybe, right? Future Hobbesians, you will need to distinguish this. This is called For Hobbes, this is called sovereignty by institution, top down, bottom up, and sovereignty by acquisition, top down. And most of the time, it seems that Hobbes actually means top down, because bottom up, it's not clear how it's possible. Well, unless you are joining an already existing sovereign. That was also a very good question. We'll talk about this later. Other question? Is this more or less clear? I mean, I understand we rushed through a lot of things, but basically what we have on the board is a bare skeleton of everything we're going to need for Hobbes. I don't think I forgot anything particularly important. So there's a bunch of details to fill in, but I think that in general, that's it.